not a lot. And Russ Dellenger, who joins us quite a bit, SI.com, on July 1st, a picture of somewhere really nice in a boat with water. Please, no news. Ross joins us on 365 Sports. That worked out for you, huh?
Well, I tell you, I walked into my Destin, Florida condo. I was there for about 5 minutes last Thursday when I got the text about USC and UCLA. So the day one of my vacation was pretty much ruined. But I did get Friday, Saturday, Sunday with actually fairly little news. So that was good. But Thursday was completely ruined.
So, to you, what was more explosive? Texas OU a year ago, which was, of course, was a bombshell, or this one coming out with USC and UCLA 11 months later?
This one probably was a little more stunning for a few reasons. Number one, I think that just geographically and culturally, it was surprising that two California schools, urban LA schools would go to a conference with a Midwest and a little bit upper Eastern Atlantic footprint. It just didn't seem that it fit, but as we all have come to know, it doesn't matter. Fit and geographic fit and cultural fit don't matter these days, but it was still stunning to see. And then the fact that this was kept as quiet as it was into the very end. We remember Oklahoma and Texas was kept quiet as well, but they had a few more weeks left of approvals and stuff like that. This was leaked the actual day, right, that it was approved, basically. And I think it was scheduled to be approved around that, if not that day, then that week or so. So it was shocking how it was really kept quiet until the day it happened. It broke that afternoon around lunch, and presidents approved it that night. They had a meeting the night before, Wednesday night, to kind of informally approve it, with like a straw poll of some sort, I believe. So it was crazy how quiet that was kept. So this one probably was a little more surprising for those two reasons. Just the fit of two LA schools in the Big Ten, and then how it was kept quiet up until the actual day it happened.
Ross, do you think that the SEC or Big Ten have an actual end game here, or is it collect as many valuable pieces as you can and work out the details later? Because even if they do have an end game, to not expect pushback from everybody you screwed over would kind of be naive.
Well, I don't know that there's an end game. I know that to add teams, you've got to add value, right? You're going to add a team, you're going to split your TV revenue distribution another way. So you have 16 teams and you have two more, you're splitting it 18 ways instead of 16. So that pie is cut up two more pieces, and everybody gets, less than they had gotten before you added those two teams, unless those two teams bring enough value to increase the yearly revenue, to increase the whole pie. So what teams out there that are not part of the Big Ten in the SEC right now, what teams increase the value of those two conferences, where when you split annual distribution up every year, the amount would go up even with adding teams? There are not very many out there, right? The list is probably like 4 to 6 teams. If you think about it, some would say, Clemson because of football, and North Carolina, and maybe even Duke with basketball, and potentially like a Florida State. And then you look west at like Oregon. Maybe because of basketball, you'd say like a Kansas. But outside of that, I don't know what teams out there, instead of those 4 to 6 teams, that the Big Ten and SEC would say, oh, yeah, we want them because we'll cut up the pie a little more, but they'll add more to the pie. It's getting to a point where you just don't have a lot of value out there with everybody left.
What are your thoughts, Ross, on the alliance that's been talked about? No, not the one that's already died, that went away once the Big Ten poached the LA schools, but the new one with the Pac-12 and the ACC that's been debated about, I guess, over the last 24 hours in particular, whether that be scheduling or, whatever else has been thrown out there, like a championship game of some sort. How much smoke do you think there is to that, and how legitimate do you think that option is? What would it even mean in the long run?
Yeah, this is typical of this time. I call it the conference realignment silly season. It's kind of like coaching silly season. It's hard to believe a lot of what you read because things are so fluid and they change. And so much stuff is being talked about. And that's another thing, I do think that is real. I think there's something there. However, the reporting on it, which has been just by a couple of outlets, has been hardly no details. I mean, There's just been no specifics, no details. It's just like partnership with ACC and Pac-12 might include a few games played and might involve ESPN, and maybe there's some kind of game between their champions. Like, that's it. I mean, it's just literally like, a couple of stories were like 3 sentences of details on it. It just, there's not much there. So I'm curious, and I may or may not have been, exploring this myself the last couple of days, trying to get more details and specifics on this, because I do think it's real. I do think it involves ESPN heavy in the ACC network. But I don't know if it's a legitimate option, because there's so many out there. There's so much being discussed that, is this real? Number one. And number two, what are the details? And I'm hesitant myself to believe anything or report anything myself without more detail and exactly what this is, and is this a legitimate option? I know, it has been discussed, and I think it has been discussed by certain people in those leagues at length, but it does seem to be kind of in its infancy. And so, I don't, like I said, these days it's hard to parse through just, hey, is this being flung out there because it was mentioned on a call once, or is this being vetted? Is this a real thing? It's tough right now. And the same thing goes for the Big 12 teams being, Big 12 being aggressive with Pac-12. Well, I mean, there's a lot of reporting out there and from reputable people that the Big 12 is being aggressive and is in serious or deep talks. I'll be honest, I haven't heard that. And I think they're being aggressive. I do, or they want to be aggressive. But I think a lot of this is coming from one side. There's a lot of wishful thinking in the Big 12 that they can get some of these teams. And I'll be honest, Pac-12 sources, at least that I've spoken with, don't think that that's real. And I think a lot of them have balked at the deep or serious negotiations or talks. I don't know that that's really happening. I think the Big 12 wants to be aggressive, and it is being aggressive, but is it being reciprocated? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, you could want something or like to, date somebody, but that doesn't mean they want to do it the other way around either. You got to have a two-way street.
Well, and like you said, a lot of people could be being used, to put something out there, that see what the reaction is, and all that. Yeah, you got to. There's an agenda potentially with everything that's out there. Yeah.
Every time something like this happens, we hear about, my God, it's about to change everything, and obviously a lot of things have changed in the last 10, 20 years. Actually, even back at Arkansas left the Southwest Conference, even before the Big 12 was formed. Ross, what do you honestly believe might be the timeline of, let's say there ends up being this mega conference championship? Is this going to be at the end of the current college football contract, the championship contract? Do we think that is everyone thinking it's coming in 2 or 3 years when it still might be 5 or 10 years down the road?
Just like you're talking about an overall new, like
if the Big Ten and the SEC end up having their own special little league, it doesn't seem like this is like imminent. It may happen, but I can't imagine that happening too quickly.
Yeah, I can't imagine it either. It doesn't feel imminent, but you know what? This whole realignment wave didn't feel imminent either. I think the USC UCLA stuff really shocked people at how quickly that happened. I feel like a lot of people within college sports realized teams were trying to bolt to get to the two richest leagues, Big Ten and SEC. The fact that they would do it already so soon, Texas, Oklahoma, and now USC, UCLA, we are heading toward what many predicted, year, 2 years, 5 years ago, even some 10 years ago, that there were going to be, a group of 35 to 40 teams separating itself from the rest, potentially in two conferences. And it does feel like that has been expedited. And it's escalating pretty quickly. So I hesitate to say that we're a long way away from some kind of, two conference, 35 team championship game or playoff just between them. Maybe it's some kind of semi-pro model. Maybe they're in some kind of semi-pro model. People have suggested that. It seems like that's a ways away, but then again, everything does seem like it's being sped up. And we got to keep in mind there's no contract for a new playoff after 2025. Yeah. So it's kind of still out there in the wind, flapping. We don't have a playoff format set, and that is something that I think makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And if you are going to do some kind of alternate championship between these two leagues or something, well, it seems more realistic now that there's not even anything on the books after 2025.
Ross, what fans of college football asked for this? Because I can't think
yeah, I think that's a good question. I think that you might find some fans in the Big Ten and SEC that are excited about their position moving forward, but I think overall, the college sports, college football fan probably is not pleased at how this is going. I think in sports, a lot of us love parity. And I know college football hasn't really ever had parity, but it's clearly whatever parity there was, right, is being zapped with every move that we've seen over the last year or two. So it's we're evolving, as I mentioned. I think it does feel like we're evolving into a minor league of a small group of teams that can maybe afford to actually pay players. And, it's going to be different. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be bad, but it's certainly going to be different. And it's going to take a long time for a lot of people to adjust to it.
You put some holes in some of the scuttlebutt there online of just all the talk that you mentioned, especially with the Big 12 and being aggressive and all that. What is actually the legitimate deal with the ACC and the grant of rights, Ross? Because that's another one of those things that everybody's screaming about is, Clemson's going to go to the SEC and, this team's going to the Big Ten. What is actually the case there? What can be done? And is there a movement where teams could get out potentially earlier?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, you talk to people in the ACC, they feel pretty bound to this grant of rights that extends to 2036. And it's a TV deal that, isn't great. It's certainly suboptimal. And I think that there have been lawyers that probably have studied that grant of rights, and just like the Texas, Oklahoma, right? They can't get out, right? They've studied it and they can't get out early unless there's some kind of agreement. And I think that's probably the case for the ACC as well. It's going to be hard to get out of that. And they're kind of bound to that. And I don't know if somebody. I think the big there are a couple of things that have been just kind of thrown at me about how they could break out of it. Number one is that enough teams leave the ACC, then maybe it becomes non-existent. I don't know if a certain amount of teams, if they were to leave or break it, then is there even a conference? And if there's not really a conference, then there's not a grant of rights. I think the other thing involves Notre Dame, which is kind of the big domino here. I think a lot of people are talking about the Big 12 aggressive and poaching Pac-12 and this ACC Pac-12 stuff, but really the thing we should be talking about in Pat Forty, my colleague, wrote a column about it on Monday after talking to some folks in South Bend, is what does Notre Dame do? And I think Notre Dame does pull out of the ACC, which they're a member of for everything except football. Does that open the door for other teams to leave the ACC? I think that's a good question. And there's the last domino, I think, or the next domino, I should say. Does Notre Dame finally agree to be in a conference? Do they go to the Big Ten, which is one of them, I think, for years? And ACC does want them as well, but right now, because of money and the situation we're in, they've probably never had more pressure, Notre Dame, in joining a conference, and in this case, the Big Ten, because of the money and the situation. So certainly one to watch, and I think that probably what Notre Dame does, and I don't think they're in a rush, that probably informs a little better of what, if anything, the SEC does, and what happens in the Pac-12, specifically Washington and Oregon. So Notre Dame is a domino for sure, and we should all keep our eyes on that.
Thank you, Ross. Appreciate your time as always. Ross Dellenger, SI.com, with us numerous times throughout, of course, what we do on Sikkim 365 Radio, 365 Sports.